Official agency records. Unaltered visual proof. Transparent enforcement. This is bodycam incident reports.
I said turn around! You're not gonna walk away from me, you hear me?
I'm complying, officer, don't you? Hey!
Whoa! Stay down! Hands behind your back!
You're on my back!
Vance, ease up!
He's resisting!
He's not resisting, let me...
Back off! I can't breathe,
Vance,
man.
get your knee
I'm
off.
filming this! He's
Vance,
assaulting!
now!
To understand the context of this assault, we need to go back 10 minutes. The location is the main concourse of Terminal B. The incident involves a 20-year veteran of the police force and a decorated Special Forces operator. Before the violence erupted, the scene was deceptively ordinary. The morning rush at the terminal was a blur of motion. Thousands of travelers, the drone of announcements, the smell of coffee and anxiety. But cutting through that chaotic noise was one figure moving with absolute precision. Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne walked through the main concourse with the kind of posture you can't buy at a costume shop. His dress uniform was immaculate. The creases were razor sharp. The ribbons on his chest told a story of 6 deployments, 12 years of special operations, and the kind of sacrifices most people only see in movies. Thorne wasn't looking for trouble. He was on official travel, transitioning between a memorial service for a fallen teammate and a classified briefing at the Capitol. He had 40 minutes to make his connection. He kept his head up, his pace steady, his garment bag over one shoulder. But he was being watched. Standing near the security checkpoint was Officer Derek Vance. A 20-year veteran of the force, Vance had a reputation among his peers. They called him the Hammer, code for an officer with a heavy hand, a short fuse, and a long history of complaints that never quite stuck. Beside him stood Officer Reed, a junior partner who had learned early on that it was easier to follow Vance's lead than to question it. Vance's eyes locked onto Thorne. He didn't see a decorated combat veteran. He didn't see a master sergeant. Through the lens of his own bias, he saw something else entirely. He saw a suspect. He saw a costume. The body cam footage, which would later be analyzed by federal prosecutors frame by frame, picks up the exact moment Vance decided to ruin his own life. He shifts his stance, sets his coffee down, and keys his radio. Dispatch, keep an eye on Concourse B. I've got a subject in military fatigues acting suspicious, possible impersonation. There was no suspicious behavior. Thorne was simply walking. But Vance stepped into his path anyway, shouting, "Hey, you, in the uniform! Hold it right there." Thorne stopped immediately. He didn't flinch. He turned slowly, controlled, and faced the officer. "Yes, sir?" Vance stepped closer, invading Thorne's personal space. This is a common tactic, intimidation designed to provoke a reaction. He circled the sergeant, his eyes scanning the uniform with exaggerated skepticism. "That's a lot of ribbons for someone your age," he sneered. "You buy those online?" Thorne kept his voice calm. "These are service ribbons, earned in combat. I am a master sergeant in the United States Special Forces." But Vance wasn't listening. "Yeah, well, anybody can buy a costume. That doesn't make you a soldier. Put the bag down." Thorne slowly lowered his carry-on to the floor. He knew exactly what was happening. He could feel the eyes of the commuters slowing down around them. He knew the variables. He was a black man in a high-tension environment, facing an armed officer who was already agitated. His training kicked in. De-escalate. Comply. Survive. "I have my military ID and my travel orders in my inside pocket," Thorne said. "I can show them to you right now to clear this up." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Vance shouted. "Don't get smart with me." At this point, Officer Reed moved to flank Thorne, blocking his path forward. The dynamic had shifted. This wasn't a consensual conversation anymore. It was a detention. Reed added, "Just do what he says, pal." Thorne replied clearly, "I am complying. I'm asking to provide identification." Vance leaned in close, his voice dropping so low, the camera microphone barely caught it. "You people think putting on a uniform gets you a free pass. You think it makes you untouchable. Not today." Thorne's jaw tightened. He looked at the body cam blinking red on Vance's chest, then directly into the officer's eyes. "Officer, I am on official orders. You are making a mistake." "The only mistake is you thinking you can talk back to me," Vance snapped. "Turn around." When Thorne asked for a reason, citing he hadn't committed a crime, Vance didn't offer a legal statute. He simply shouted, "Because I said so! Turn around!" Vance didn't wait for compliance. He reached out and grabbed the Master Sergeant's wrist, yanking it upward with unnecessary force, screaming, "Stop resisting!" Even though Thorne was standing perfectly still, the shout echoed through the terminal. Heads turned. A woman with a stroller froze. A man in a business suit raised his phone and started recording. They were watching a disaster unfold in real time, but for Officer Vance, it was too late to back down. His ego had taken the wheel. He tightened his grip on the arm of a man who could have killed him with his bare hands in 3 seconds, but who chose instead to remain paralyzed by discipline. Vance wound up his arm, preparing to escalate force against a target he didn't understand. "Get on the ground! Now!" And then the world tilted. The floor came up fast. Officer Vance didn't use a takedown technique taught at the academy. He used a shove, a violent, impulsive thrust into the small of Master Sergeant Thorne's back. At the same time, Officer Reed hooked Thorne's left leg. Gravity did the rest. The sound of a human body hitting industrial tile is distinct. It is a wet, heavy thud that echoes in the stomach of everyone who hears it. Thorne's knees hit first, then his shoulder, then the side of his face. The impact was sickeningly loud, silencing the nearby conversations in the terminal. For a split second, the concourse was dead silent. Then, chaos erupted. "Stop moving! Stop resisting!" Vance screamed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. He dropped his full weight, 210 pounds plus gear, driving his knee directly into the spine of the man lying prone on the floor. Thorne didn't fight. He didn't flail. Even with his face pressed against the cold, dirty floor, with shock waves of pain radiating from his shoulder, his discipline held. He knew that if he moved a muscle, if he tried to protect his face, Vance would interpret it as an attack. So he lay still, eyes open, staring at the scuff marks on the officer's boots. "I am not resisting," Thorne said through gritted teeth. "I am complying." "Shut up!" Vance grabbed Thorne's wrists and wrenched them behind his back, twisting the joints to the breaking point before snapping the handcuffs shut, the metal bit deep into the skin. You should have thought about that before you decided to play soldier. Around them, the atmosphere had shifted from curiosity to hostility. The public wasn't blind. They saw a man in a pristine uniform, hands raised, being assaulted. The smartphones rose like a digital wall. Dozens of cameras were now recording every frame of Vance's career suicide. "He didn't do anything," a woman yelled from the coffee line. "That's a Master Sergeant, you idiot." A man in a veteran's cap shouted, stepping forward. "Get off his back!" Officer Reed panicked. He turned to the crowd, hand hovering near his pepper spray. "Back up! Everyone back up! This is a police matter!" Vance hauled Thorne to his feet. The Master Sergeant's uniform was now covered in dust. His cheek was scraped and bleeding slightly. But his expression hadn't changed. He looked at Vance not with fear, but with a terrifying, cold calculation. He was memorizing his face. "You have made a grave error," Thorne said quietly. "We'll see about that," Vance panted, sweat beading on his forehead. "Let's see what the database says about your little costume." Before they could drag him away, a voice cut through the noise like a whip. "What the hell is going on here?" Lieutenant Sterling, the watch commander for the Transport Authority, pushed through the ring of bystanders. She took in the scene in a single glance. The angry crowd, the shaken junior officer, the aggressive posture of Vance, and the man in handcuffs wearing the uniform of the United States Army Special Forces. Vance stepped forward, trying to control the narrative. "Lieutenant, subject was acting suspicious, refused to identify, possible stolen valor. He got aggressive, we had to neutralize. Thorne stood tall despite the cuffs. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice steady. "My military identification is in my left breast pocket. My travel orders are in the right. I was assaulted while complying with a lawful command." Sterling looked at Vance, then at Thorne. She saw the ribbons. She saw the scrape on his cheek. And she saw the undeniable bearing of an operator. A knot of dread formed in her stomach. "Check his pockets, Vance," Sterling ordered. "LT, we need to get him to holding first. Check his pockets now." Vance scoffed, shaking his head. He reached into Thorne's jacket, rough and dismissive, and pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open, ready to expose a fake ID or a civilian driver's license. He froze. The card wasn't a standard CAC card. It was a specialized identifier used by Tier 1 personnel. Vance stared at it. He blinked. He looked at the name. Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne. He looked at the unit designation. Special Forces Group. Airborne. He pulled the folded papers from the other pocket. He scanned the header. Department of Defense. Top secret clearance. Priority travel orders. The color drained from Vance's face so fast it looked like he might faint. The silence that stretched between them was heavy, suffocating. Sterling snatched the documents from Vance's hand. She read them once. She closed her eyes for a brief second, exhaling a breath that signaled the end of her officers' careers. When she opened them, her eyes were burning with fury. "Uncuff him," Sterling whispered. Vance hesitated. "But, Lieutenant, he was—" "Uncuff him right now!" Sterling screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Get those cuffs off him immediately!" Vance fumbled for his keys. His hands, previously so steady and aggressive, were now shaking. He unlocked the mechanism. Thorne pulled his arms free, rotating his shoulders to test the joints. He didn't rub his wrists. He didn't complain about the pain. Thorne reached out, calmly took his ID and orders back from the stunned lieutenant and placed them carefully back into his pockets. He brushed the dust off his chest, straightening his ribbon rack. The dynamic had completely inverted. A minute ago, Thorne was a suspect on the floor. Now, he was the highest-ranking authority in the room, protected by the full weight of the federal government. Sterling turned to Thorne, her face pale. "Master Sergeant, are you injured? Do you need a medic?" Thorne ignored her question. He turned his gaze slowly to Officer Vance, who was now taking a half step back, realizing the magnitude of what he had just done. The crowd was still filming. The evidence was everywhere. "I want the names and badge numbers of these two officers," Thorne said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a judge passing a sentence. "And I want a federal representative from the Judge Advocate General's office contacted. Immediately." Vance tried to speak, tried to find some footing. "Look, buddy, you were being evasive. If you had just—" "You do not speak to me," Thorne cut him off. "You have surrendered that privilege." Lieutenant Sterling grabbed Vance by the shoulder and physically pulled him back. "That's enough! Both of you, give me your radios! You are off the floor. Now." As Vance and Reed were marched away, stripped of their authority in front of the very crowd they had tried to intimidate, Thorne stood alone in the center of the terminal. He watched them go. He knew this wasn't over. The physical violence had ended, but the real war, the war of accountability, was just beginning. And unlike Officer Vance, Marcus Thorne never entered a battle he didn't intend to win. In the Chief of Police's office, the air conditioning was running full blast, but Chief Miller was sweating. On the large monitor on his wall, a frozen frame from a bystander's cell phone video burned like a neon sign of impending doom. It showed Officer Vance's knee buried in the back of a uniformed master sergeant. Miller had seen bad arrests before. He had seen lawsuits, but he had never seen anything that radiated catastrophe quite like this. His phone rang. It wasn't the mayor. It wasn't the city council. The caller ID displayed a Washington, D.C. area code. Miller picked up the receiver. He didn't even get to say hello. "This is the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division," a voice said, cold and clinical. "We are opening a priority investigation into the incident at Terminal B. Do not touch that footage. Do not let those officers leave the building. Federal agents are 20 minutes out." The line went dead. Usually, police departments investigate themselves. It's a slow, protective process called internal affairs. It takes months. Union representatives negotiate. Reports are sanitized. Officers are placed on paid administrative leave until the news cycle moves on. But Master Sergeant Thorne wasn't a local citizen. He was a federal asset. And the assault on him wasn't a policy violation. It was an act of war against the Department of Defense. Down in the break room, Officer Vance and Officer Reed sat in silence. Vance was still pacing, running on adrenaline and denial. "It's fine," Vance muttered, trying to convince himself. He resisted. "I followed protocol. The union will kill this. Worst case, I get a week suspension." The door swung open. It wasn't their union rep. 4 men in suits walked in. They didn't look like cops. They moved differently. 2 of them wore the lapel pins of the NCIS. The other 2 were FBI. They didn't bring notepads. They brought federal warrants. "Travis Vance, Cole Reed," the lead agent said. He didn't ask. He confirmed. "Stand up." "Who are you?" Vance demanded, his bravado thinning. "I'm waiting for my representation." "This isn't an internal interview, officer," the agent replied. "We are seizing your body cameras, your department phones, and your radios as evidence in a federal criminal inquiry. Hand them over." Vance froze. "Criminal for a resist arrest charge?" "For deprivation of rights under color of law," the agent corrected him. "And for falsifying a police report. You are no longer under the jurisdiction of the city police. You are now subjects of a federal investigation." The gravity of the situation slammed into the room. In the United States legal system, there is a terrifying difference between a state crime and a federal crime. Federal conviction rates are over 95%. There is no parole in the federal system, and the Department of Justice does not lose cases like this. Across the city, the machinery of the government began to turn with terrifying efficiency. IT specialists from the FB. I entered the precinct's server room. They mirrored the hard drives, every email Vance had ever sent, every text message Reed had exchanged, every prior complaint regarding racial profiling that had been buried in a file cabinet. It was all being sucked into a federal database. They weren't looking for mistakes. They were looking for a pattern. At the transport terminal, the crime scene was being processed not by local techs, but by federal forensic teams. They measured the distance of the shove. They photographed the blood smear on the tile where Thorne's face had hit. They interviewed the witnesses who were still waiting, shaken, to give their statements. The video evidence was overwhelming. It wasn't just the body cams. It was the surveillance angles. It was the 20 different cell phone videos uploaded to social media, which were now being preserved as evidence. The narrative Vance had tried to build, the suspicious behavior, the aggression, was crumbling in real time. The audio analysis was already complete. Experts had isolated Vance's whispers. They had enhanced the sound of the handcuffs clicking. They had flagged the racial slurs. Back in the chief's office, Miller watched the agents work. He knew what was happening. He wasn't witnessing an investigation. He was witnessing an amputation. The federal government was cutting out the infection to save the body. Master Sergeant Thorne sat in a private conference room nearby, attended to by a Navy corpsman who had been dispatched to check his injuries. A lawyer from the Judge Advocate General's Corps sat opposite him. "Sir," the lawyer said, looking up from his notes, "the U.S. attorney has already reviewed the preliminary footage. They aren't going to offer a plea deal for a misdemeanor. They are elevating the charges." Thorne nodded once. He didn't smile. "Good," Thorne said. The blue wall of silence, the unwritten rule that cops protect cops, was strong. But it wasn't strong enough to stop the United States government. The badge that Officer Vance had used as a shield for 20 years had just been stripped away. He was naked before the law, and the law was coming for him. Federal indictments are terrifying documents. They don't scream, they whisper. They list the charges in dry, clinical language that strips away all excuses. Count 1, deprivation of rights, under color of law resulting in bodily injury. Count 2, conspiracy to obstruct justice. Count 3, falsification of records. When the trial of United States versus Derek Vance began, the courtroom was packed. But the man sitting at the defense table didn't look like the hammer of Terminal B anymore. This is where the true punishment begins. Not in a prison cell, but in the public dismantling of an ego. For 20 years, Derek Vance had worn a uniform that acted as armor. It made him feel tall. It made him feel invincible. It gave him permission to demand respect he hadn't earned. But in Federal Court District 4, you are not allowed to wear a police uniform as a defendant. Vance sat in a gray, ill-fitting suit that looked like it had been bought off the rack the day before. Without the badge, without the gun belt, without the radio, he looked small. He looked ordinary. The physical transformation was jarring. The man who had barked orders and shoved a special forces operator into the floor was now hunched over, staring obsessively at a stain on the defense table. His hands, the same hands that had twisted Thorne's wrists, were shaking. He kept trying to clasp them together to stop the tremors, but he couldn't hide it. He wouldn't look at the jury. He wouldn't look at the gallery. And he absolutely refused to look at the first row behind the prosecutor, because sitting there, like a statue carved out of granite, was Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne. Thorne was wearing his dress blues. They were immaculate. The creases were razor sharp. He sat with his back straight, hands resting calmly on his knees. He didn't look angry. He didn't look happy. He looked patient. He was the living embodiment of the discipline Vance lacked. The contrast was brutal. The victim looked like a leader. The authority figure looked like a criminal. The climax of the trial wasn't a surprise witness or a shouting match. It was a video screen. The federal prosecutor, a woman with a reputation for hunting corrupt officials, stood up. She didn't make a long speech. She didn't need to. She simply said, "The government asks the jury to watch Government Exhibit 1A, the defendant's own body camera." The lights dimmed. The courtroom grew deathly quiet. Then the audio kicked in. "Get on the ground, now!" The sound of Vance's recorded voice, distorted by rage, tore through the silence of the courtroom like a gunshot. The jurors flinched. On the screen, the chaotic footage played out in high definition. The shove, the fall, the sickening thud of Thorne's face hitting the tile. "I am not resisting. I am complying." "Shut up!" In the courtroom, the real Derek Vance closed his eyes. He couldn't watch. He physically shrank into his chair, as if trying to disappear. Every second of the video was a hammer blow to his defense. The jury watched the screen, then looked at the small, trembling man in the gray suit, then back at the screen. They were trying to reconcile the monster in the video with the coward at the table. They couldn't. The prosecutor let the video play to the very end, to the moment Vance whispered the racial slur. In the recording, Vance sounded arrogant, confident that no one would ever touch him. In the courtroom, the silence that followed that whisper was suffocating. Vance's attorney tried to object, tried to contextualize, tried to talk about stress and split-second decisions. But the video didn't lie. When Officer Reed took the stand, the betrayal was complete. Reed, looking to save himself from a 10-year sentence, had taken a plea deal. He sat in the witness box and pointed a finger directly at his former mentor. "Did Master Sergeant Thorne pose a threat?" the prosecutor asked. "No, ma'am," Reed answered quietly. "Did Officer Vance have any legal basis to initiate physical contact?" "No, ma'am." "Why did you arrest him then?" Reed paused. He looked at Vance, who was staring at his shoes. Because Officer Vance didn't like the way he answered back, Reed said, and because we thought we could get away with it. The defense collapsed. There was no grand conspiracy to uncover, no hidden weapon to reveal. It was just ego and bias, stripped naked under the fluorescent lights of a federal courthouse. When the closing arguments finished, the jury didn't need days to deliberate. They didn't even need lunch. They were back in 4 hours. As the foreman stood up to read the verdict, Vance finally looked up. His face was gray. He looked at the judge, desperate for a miracle that wasn't coming. Then, for the first time in the entire trial, he looked back at the gallery. He locked eyes with Master Sergeant Thorne. Thorne didn't smile. He just nodded, a single, barely perceptible dip of his chin. It was a signal. It's over. "We, the jury," the foreman read, "find the defendant Derek Vance guilty on all counts." The sound of the gavel wasn't loud, but it hit harder than any baton. Federal marshals moved in immediately. They didn't ask Vance to stand up nicely. They pulled his arms back, just like he had done to Thorne. They snapped handcuffs on his wrists, just like he had done to Thorne. The metal clicked. Vance flinched at the sound. He was led out of the courtroom, not as an officer of the law, but as a convicted felon. The uniform he had disgraced was gone forever. The badge was gone. The pension was gone. And as the heavy oak doors swung shut behind him, the only thing left in the room was the silence of justice finally served. Sentencing hearings in federal court are quiet affairs. There are no cameras allowed, no outbursts from the gallery, and no surprises. The drama of the trial is over. All that remains is the arithmetic of punishment. Derek Vance stood before the bench one last time. He was no longer wearing the ill-fitting gray suit. He was wearing the bright orange jumpsuit of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. His wrists were shackled to a chain around his waist. The transformation was absolute. The man who had demanded total submission from others was now the property of the state. The judge looked down over the rim of her glasses. She didn't lecture him on morality. She simply applied the sentencing guidelines for deprivation of rights under color of law involving bodily injury. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice echoing in the sparse room, "you betrayed the public trust. You weaponized your authority against a citizen who has dedicated his life to protecting this country. The court sentences you to 120 months in federal custody, followed by 3 years of supervised release. 10 years. Vance didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just slumped forward, the air leaving his lungs in a single defeated exhale. 10 years without a badge. 10 years without a gun. 10 years of being exactly what he hated most, a prisoner. Officer Reed fared slightly better, but his career was just as dead. For his cooperation, he received 18 months and a permanent felony record. He would never hold a job in law enforcement or security again. He walked out of the courtroom free on bail pending surrender, but he walked out to a world where his name was toxic. The civil fallout was swift. The city settled Master Sergeant Thorne's lawsuit for a sum in the millions before it even reached a jury. But the money wasn't the point. The point was the permanent mark on the record. The police department underwent a federally mandated purge. The old-school culture that Vance had thrived in was dismantled. Training protocols were rewritten. The precinct commander was forced into early retirement. A photo of Master Sergeant Thorne, bruised, handcuffed, but dignified, became a slide in the Academy's training deck. The caption underneath read simply, "Failure of duty." 6 months later, the morning sun broke through the glass ceiling of another busy transport terminal. The noise was the same, the rolling suitcases, the announcements, the coffee. But the man walking through the concourse was different. Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne was back in uniform. His shoulder had healed. The bruising on his face was a distant memory. His dress blues were, as always, immaculate. He moved with the same steady, rhythmic pace of a man on a mission. He approached the security checkpoint. A young police officer, fresh from the academy, was standing guard. He saw the uniform. He saw the ribbons. The young officer didn't see a suspect. He didn't see a costume. He saw a master sergeant. The officer straightened his posture. He didn't block the path. He didn't ask for ID. He simply nodded respectfully and stepped aside. "Good morning, Sergeant," the officer said. "Thank you for your service." Thorne paused. He looked at the young officer, perhaps seeing a ghost of what policing should be. "Good morning," Thorne replied. He walked past the checkpoint, past the crowds, and toward his gate. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The system that had tried to break him had been corrected. The men who had tried to humiliate him were sitting in 6x8 cells, while he was walking freely toward his next command. Justice isn't always swift, and it isn't always pretty. But on that day, in Terminal B, the balance had been restored. Derek Vance learned the hard way that a uniform doesn't make you powerful, character does. And when you strip away the badge, the gun, and the authority, all that is left is the person you truly are. Marcus Thorne was a soldier, Derek Vance was a bully. And in the end, the world saw the difference. If you believe that authority should always be held accountable, and that no badge grants the right to abuse, make sure to like this video and subscribe. Share this story, because the only way to prevent the next incident is to make sure the world remembers this one.
This briefing is now complete. For more factual case reviews, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching Bodycam Incident Reports.